Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Teachers Talk podcast. My name is Alex, but my professional counterparts know me as Jeff, so that's what I'll be going by through these podcasts. And today I'm going to be joined by my good friend and colleague Jess, who has the YouTube channel Jess Avenue, and we're going to be talking about our experiences in residence life and how those have helped us become a teacher and sort of transition the skills and everything that we need for our future careers. So, how are you doing, Jess? It's nice to have you back on the channel, and I'm glad we get to talk
Yeah,
about this.
thank you. I'm very excited to be here. It's a pretty busy time school-wise, wrapping everything up for the end of the term, but I'm super excited to be here and just talk about Dawning again, kind of relive that nostalgia and go over the roles and what it was like. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and talk about it.
Yeah, especially as at the time of recording, we're pretty much coming up to the 1 year anniversary of when we left our residence life experience. So I guess for those of the viewers who don't know what residence life is, do you want to just give a quick explanation around that?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm pretty sure all universities offer residence life. It's an option for students to live on campus, especially in their first year. And our role as a Don, community leader, RA, whatever you want to call it, was to welcome the students to campus, support them. We would have a group of anywhere between 30 and 50 students. And we were responsible for running events, getting to know them, connecting them to the resources that they need, helping them academically, pretty much answering any questions they had about university life in general. So yeah, it was a really fun role. I loved getting to meet students. You worked on great teams as well. You were very supported in that role. So I loved it.
Yeah, and I think just going off that, like as a residence life don or RA or different universities call them different things. It was wonderful just to get to know the team in general. You were working with about 5 to 10 of your other peers who obviously are all very interested in student leadership and student governance, and they're all very connected with different communities and share a bunch of different resources, as well as supervisors and everyone else. And I think it was just a great growing experience for myself. I mean, you were doing it for 3.5 years, I believe. And
Mhm.
for myself, I was there for about 6 years, just because the Masters dragged it out a little bit. But I very much enjoyed my time there, and I'm very nostalgic and I miss it a lot. I really wish I could go back. But unfortunately, those times have passed, and we're on to bigger and better things now. Um, so I guess my first question would be that do you think that your experience as a Don has helped you in your teaching profession as early as now?
I would say definitely. There are a lot of transferable things that I learned from Dawning, but I would probably say most importantly was the value of connection. I think Dawning really preaches you need to get to know your students in order to best support them. And I think that's a very similar principle to teaching. And a lot of my profs have reiterated that as well, that it's important to get to know your students first, and then everything else will kind of fall into place. So I think Dawning definitely honed that in for me, really allowed me to work on my people skills, my like how to talk to people, support them, get to know them, make them feel comfortable, stuff like that. So I definitely thought that was really valuable from Dawning, um, as well as just being responsible for other people. Dawning, you're typically working with people age like 17 to 20-ish. I'm in primary junior and teachers college, so I'll be working with a lot younger people in the future, but I think the premise is kind of the same of this is your group of people, you're responsible for them. And I think that's a very transferable skill to teachers college and being a teacher. So yeah, that was definitely valuable and totally worth my time. And then as well, Waterloo is a very diverse school. And I think that's a pretty irreplaceable experience getting to work with people from different countries, different backgrounds, different religions, different goals in life, different views. I think getting to work with them firsthand and learning about them is going to be amazing. As a teacher, I can connect to my students better and kind of relate to those experiences and say like, hey, I know someone kind of like you. I worked with someone kind of like you.
Yeah.
Here's what worked before. Let me know about yourself now, kind of thing. So I think those were all pretty valuable and overall Dawning. People might not maybe make the connection right away between like being a Don and being a teacher, but there's so much of it that is transferable. So
Yeah, I think for myself, obviously there's the piece of supporting students, which I think is massive because you need to get to know the campus partners and you need to get to know other community partners and the resources available to students because they don't know them quite yet. especially as they're either new to the area or, in the case of international students, they're new to Canada and the Canadian education system, which can be a very big culture shock. But even past sort of supporting students and providing them with resources, I think the next biggest part of the job was about programming, both not only for fun but also for educational programs. And if I'm not mistaken, you were around at the time that we were still doing educational programs there?
Yeah, just for 1 year.
Okay. But yeah, so for those of you who aren't aware what educational programs are, probably in Dawning, is it would almost be very similar to what you would have in a lesson plan. You would sort of get together with your supervisor and you would go over some form of content that you want them to learn. And that can be either about like emotional intelligence pieces or pieces that would help them in their professional career, such as resume writing, cover letters, etc. Or it can even just be little fun things, but you would generally have to write out sort of a program plan and goals and everything else. And I think that even though they were very short planning sessions, I very much think that they have helped me transition into lesson planning now as a teacher. And maybe that's just because I'm going to be doing IS, so high school students, which are fairly similar in age gap, especially because my teachables are both senior level chemistry and biology, so grade 11 and 12. So that's sort of the age range that we were already sort of dealing with in Dawning.
Mhm.
But this actually brings me to my next question is, what other skills can you think of that were sort of transferable to teaching?
For sure. I would say time management, most importantly. Dawning was a job on top of already being a full-time student that you had to put in probably 20 hours a week into it. And teaching is kind of one of those jobs where it's very hard to turn off. I hear all the time about people like taking stuff home to work on it, working on the weekends. And so I think Dawning really kind of taught me that A, it's important to make time for yourself, but then B, how to properly still allocate enough time to care for your students as well as for your studies. So I think time management as a skill in general will be super important for teaching, and I definitely had to work on that a lot as a Dawn. So I'm glad to have had that experience in my undergrad, and I think it'll be very useful for teaching. As well as kind of mentioned this before, but just prioritizing connection and being able to connect with people and knowing kind of what questions to ask, how to set up a space where people feel comfortable enough to share and connect with you. And I think that's going to be super important for teaching. Not all students are just like, hey, here's everything about my life, here's everything you need to know about me. So I think having the patience and the adequate space and time to build those connections with students was something that I also learned from Dawning, and that will be again applicable to teaching. As well as kind of on the same vein, but just building a community, and kind of doing that through like decoration and setting up a space and just having representation through that decoration, whether it's like flags from different countries or like icons of people of different ethnicities and backgrounds. I think that Dawning kind of preached that, like, make your community inclusive, and then that's really important for teaching as well. You want your students to like feel seen and feel that they're represented within the classroom. So I think those were all pretty important skills that I learned from Dawning that are also very valid to teaching.
Yeah, definitely. I do think that probably the biggest piece of that was time management, especially in the first year as a Dawn. You sort of have your regular day of classes, and then you would come home and you would be meeting with students and supporting them and planning your programs. You would have to do your event shopping, so going to whatever stores you need to pick up supplies for that. You'd have to clean up after events, sort of, etc. And I do think that it was definitely a big change for me, especially like getting that organized. I think before Dawning, it was mostly just this is my class schedule, and anything outside of this is fun, and I could do
Mm-hmm.
whatever I wanted. But then once I sort of got into the mindset of being a Dawn, it very much became about how do I spend my time intentionally, and how do I plan for, to get the best results for myself and my students without sort of being overbearing. Because obviously, if you put too much time into something, and this is just a general piece of advice for teachers, is you really want to avoid getting burnt out. The school year is
Mm-hmm.
long, it's 10 months, and if you're going home every day and, doing 5, 6 hours of work in the evening, it can be quite hard on you and hard on your personal life. So I would just, you know, caution people to be intentional with your time. And then I think another big piece for me is communication. Not only are you constantly communicating with students and trying to make yourself approachable with them, but you're also in constant communication with your supervisors, with your peers, trying to plan different events or collaborations. And it definitely I think there's so many pieces to that because we'd be in meetings, which you'd have to focus on interpersonal communication and verbal communication. We'd be writing so many emails and writing so many reports that there's your written communication. We'd be communicating between police services and medical services, firefighters, etc. And I think there's just a lot there that you get comfortable communicating in many different situations with many people who come from diverse backgrounds or who have different experiences. Um, but yeah, and then I'm just going to move into my last question here.
Oh, can I
Is
add one more?
oh,
Just thought of.
definitely 100%.
Okay. I would say emotional management. For
Yes.
me, I'm a very empathetic person, and some things that students share with you are like very heavy and very personal, and you're hearing that from probably 50 different people. So I think realizing that it wasn't fully my responsibility to monitor them and like be responsible for every part of their being. And same goes for teaching. As much as you're responsible for them during the day, there are other resources that you can connect them with. You're not the be all end all, and there are other resources around you to help support you and your students. So that was something else I learned from Dawning, that it was never like fully my responsibility to like help care for, heal these students, that it was
Mhm.
also very much my responsibility to connect them with the proper resources. So
Yeah,
that was a big one.
and I do think that's a big part of teaching as well, especially as we start to get more into the age of inclusion and diversity in our schools and classrooms. And many students are going to be having IEPs or becoming, just we have diverse classrooms. And I do think there's something to be said about, you're not the only person who has to provide help or provide resources. You can point them in the right directions and, arrange with those resources different meetings and different ways to support them. But you're not the only person who needs to support them, especially through various heavy topics. Like I think when you think of people who come into a school, not only are you going to have guidance counselors and physiotherapists and psychotherapists, but you're also going to have occupational therapists who are going to help people who sort of come into school who they might have a disability or they might have recently broken a leg and they need some form of accommodations. And we are going to be very much connecting our students with different resources to help them through their day-to-day lives in the classroom. And I do think that was something we learned in Dawning. So thank you for bringing that up. I actually forgot that, and that's a big piece. And I do think that it's important that all teachers and all people interested in Dawning get to know that as well. But yeah, then I will bring to my last question here, and it's, would you recommend students who are interested in teaching or going to be going to Teachers College to get involved in their university's residence life program?
Totally. As I said, I used it on all of my applications to Teachers College. Got into 2 out of the 3, so I'm not saying it's going to work every time, but it was definitely a big component of my application. And even though you might not necessarily be able to count it under like direct teaching hours, I think the skills that you use from it are totally invaluable and very well connected to teaching. And it's everything is all about how you spin it in the end. So I think just being able to communicate and pitch the skills that you did learn from Dawning, which hopefully you can even take points from this podcast episode. I think Jeff and I did a really good job laying out a lot of different transferable skills and points from Dawning. So overall, yeah, I would say it's very valuable, A, for your resume and applications, but B, just to grow as a person and to have fun and to meet more people and to feel valuable and do something good for people. So yeah, I
Yeah.
enjoyed it and I would 100% recommend it.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I think when it came down to my application, I did have my dawning hours on there. It wasn't because I think, and I'll probably link your episode, like your video on applying to Teachers College, because I think you did a really good job with that one and just
Mhm.
going through the application. But in the section where we were sort of asked to provide our hours, so there was direct teaching hours working with the age group you're working with, and then there was also direct hours working with age groups not in your teaching range, I believe. So dawning hours actually work under there, since generally, like you've got those 17 to 19-year-olds a lot of the time. So I had
Mhm.
actually included that on my application and talked about it quite extensively, as we sort of mentioned, all the transferable skills and everything else. So I would recommend anyone who's interested in teaching get that experience with residence life. There's pretty much universities are always hiring for residence life, and there's lots of different ways to be involved. You don't necessarily just need to be a Don. You can be a point person or someone who connects students with various resources, such as at at Waterloo, there were the front desk assistants and the peer tutors who came onto our floors occasionally. So I would say get involved in residence life however you can. It's definitely good to get to know a team and the community and get to just practice sharing your experiences and resources with students and acting as a mentor. And I think that's something that's very overlooked today. And I do think it can go far in teaching. But with that said, I guess I'll wrap up this episode because it's been about 15, 20 minutes or so. So thank you, Jess, for coming on, and I hope you have a great day. And to everyone watching, thank you for tuning in, and I hope to see you around soon. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and yeah, have fun. Bye, everyone.
Bye.